Hey folks, David Stewart here. Let's talk a little bit about this Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. This is a animated movie that lots of people have been trying to get me to watch, I guess for like a year now. So if you like this movie, I don't dislike you for disagreeing with me or anything like that. You can like whatever you like. I didn't like this movie, and I wanted to take a few minutes and tell you why and just give a little bit of an analysis of this movie and what I saw in it and what I didn't like in it. So I'm going to start with an actual evaluation of the movie, and then I kind of want to talk about some meta things that have to do with the culture war and stuff like that. So first of all, let's talk a little bit about production. We'll jump right into that. The production on this movie is one of these things that you are either going to love or hate. And it seems like the animation style is something that lots of people really enjoyed and really gravitated towards and just really liked. And I actually intensely disliked the visual style of this movie. It was, to me, very headache-inducing. In fact, I had to watch it over 3 different nights because I had such a hard time being able to tolerate the animation style. So this is a point that I want to make, which is that in any given medium, there are certain ways of doing things that get established. So you notice that all of the CG movies, after a while, they kind of start to look pretty similar to one another. And in fact, Into the Spider-Verse really doesn't look dissimilar from any other CG movie. It looks a lot like a Disney CG animated film. I think the Gwenda character, or the Gwen character, who's one of the spider people, there's going to be spoilers in this review. It's just how it's going to be. She looks almost exactly like Rapunzel from Frozen, like her facial structure, the proportion of her eyes and everything. But what they do to this is they add a bunch of extra lines like you'd be looking at a drawn comic book. And so that creates a little bit of a different style. The problem is they didn't just stop there. They added a whole bunch of other things, including an overprint effect. In all kinds of different scenes, they make it look like you're looking at something that's supposed to be a 3D image with 2 different images. This is a thing that happened because of printing errors back in the day, because different colors were printed on different parts of the press. So sometimes you'd get a color kind of bleeding over the edge of where the black line was on a Spider-Man character. So they put that in all kinds of scenes, and it really doesn't look good to me. I think it's an eyesore. They do it throughout the movie. They do it constantly. I think the lines on the faces to make them look more like a drawn character are distracting. I don't think they look very good. And another thing I really, really disliked about the animation style was the fact that they lowered the frame rate of the animation. Normally, if you're going to do a 3D CG animated film, which is what this is, you're going to keep the frame rate good enough that people can actually watch it, like 12 or 24 frames a second. In this case, it feels really low, like 5 frames a second. It feels slower than classic animation. It's choppy. They don't keep that completely consistently, but it's enough where characters are like very herky-jerky. There's no kind of blur in between the motions. It just looks really awful beginning to end. I did not enjoy the animation style at all. But here's what I will say about it. I think if this had been a 5-minute to 20-minute short film, I would have been praising the animation style. I think it entirely has to do with it being far too stylized and lasting for far too long. This is a fairly long movie. It's almost 2 hours worth of that animation. And so gimmicks we get tired of quickly. If the gimmick is there for a 3-minute short film or a 10 or even 20-minute short film, we accept the gimmick and we like it. If the gimmick persists for 2 hours, it becomes old. And in this case, it really was almost intolerable for me to be able to watch this movie. So the aesthetics I would rate pretty low because there was really nothing special about them. They just took standard aesthetics and overmarked them with, it's almost like a rotoscoping but of CG animation, and it didn't work for me. I'd rate them pretty low, like 4. And the animation I'd put it like a 2 out of 10. It was that bad. I really, really disliked it. But other people really love it. So I guess your mileage will vary. But in general, I think trying to rebel and be completely different from what is standard in a medium isn't always a good idea, because a lot of times we establish those things because they work. We establish smooth motion because it works. We do all these things because they work. And if they had done the comic booky kind of stuff here and there, or they had just done it at the beginning of the movie and then it had moved into something a little bit more traditional, I would have been a lot more accepting of it. Likewise, this was particularly punishing in the action scenes where things seemed to happen very fast and jerkily because of how low the frame rate was. I just didn't like it at all. So to me, that was a big negative. Makes the movie almost unwatchable. If you can tolerate it, that gives you a better shot of actually liking it. I'm not going to use the word intensely, but I just disliked the music throughout the movie. They tended to use a pop soundtrack, which used music that I don't like, which is going to be things like rap and hip hop. That's music that doesn't connect with me. I don't enjoy listening to it. I find it annoying. So for the most part, the soundscape of this movie was really annoying, beginning to end. I didn't like the score music that was written with it as well. It was very bland and tended to just be big, loud, dissonant chords, the standard crap that's popular now. So the production of this movie, I would actually rate really, really low. It'd be less than 5 out of 10, which is an F. That to me makes the movie almost unwatchable. Now, your mileage, I said, would vary because I guess there's people who like that kind of hip hop music, and there's probably people who thought the unique animation was really cool. And indeed, I would have thought it was cool had it not persisted throughout the entire movie. It was entirely a function of duration, not intensity. Moving past production, let's talk a little bit about how the story was executed. So the story, I found, it felt long, and it felt long because there wasn't a whole lot of what I call story velocity, meaning things didn't seem to be going forward. We spent a lot of time in action scenes and a lot of time with characters talking or trying to explain what's happening in the plot, and very little being done, very little forward momentum of what's going on. So they establish, and it takes a long time to establish the conflict too. So the exposition is painfully long. I watched a little bit of the exposition with my son before he became too bored, and I'm very glad that I turned it off because this is not a movie that's appropriate for kids. I just thought he saw it like on, when I was going through my Netflix, and it's like Spider-Man, I'm like, we'll watch a little bit and just sample the beginning, and he was far too bored by it. So it takes a really long time to get going. It rehashes the origin story of Spider-Man in 2 times. So it tells you Spider-Man's origin in this voiceover saying, like, for 10 years, I've been the Amazing Spider-Man. Then you get to see Miles. There's a new Spider-Man, Miles Morales. You get to see his origin, which is the same as Peter Parker's origin. He gets bit by a spider and gets turned into Spider-Man. And he has the same experiences, and they even draw you to the fact that they're just repeating the same scenes that you've seen a million times before in other books and in other movies. And so just the fact that they're even aware that they're repeating the same thing that they've done before, it just says to me that those scenes are unnecessary. Or that they should have been far more condensed than they were. But it takes a long time to get the conflict going. It's so long, in fact, that we don't really know what's happening until 30 minutes into the movie, when finally there's this big device. We've spent the entire time thus far trying to have exposition on the main character, Miles. We finally meet Spider-Man, and then Kingpin kills Spider-Man. So that's a good reason why I probably wouldn't show this to a kid. It's very violent. It's very, very crass. So Kingpin kills Spider-Man, which kind of traumatizes Miles. He's figuring out that he's becoming Spider-Man. Spider-Man gives him a little USB stick that he needs to plug into a machine. And that's the conflict. That's how we finally establish the conflict. So the exposition focuses entirely on characters and nothing on the plot, which makes it feel very slow for the first act. Then we finally have things happen, and then we have some kickoff into the second act when Spider-Man, who's dead, shows back up again, except he's kind of middle-aged. And this Spider-Man shows up, and he's a pathos induction of the traditional Spider-Man. He's middle-aged, divorced. He doesn't look fat, but they call him overweight throughout the movie. They call him fat throughout the movie. He's just the pathetic version of Spider-Man that Marvel Comics wrote. In the 2010s, they had Spider-Man get divorced from his wife and all kinds of other things, like it's part of some deal with the devil. I stopped reading Spider-Man a long time ago, so if you're a comic fan of that, you could probably tell me exactly how it was. And then there's this very awkward middle point of the movie where this pathetic Spider-Man is trying to teach Miles how to be Spider-Man, but you don't really believe either side of it. And we kind of skitter around this plot of like we have to repair this USB stick or make a new one in order to shut down this interdimensional gateway device. Finally, about an hour into the movie, things just almost come to a standstill. We've brought in all these other Spider-Man from other parallel universes. Some are funny, some are not that funny, but they're meant to be funny. And the characters kind of stand around and do nothing for like 30 minutes until kind of deciding that Miles is not good enough or not strong enough to actually help them. And so Miles solves this conflict that they've introduced where Miles is not a good enough Spider-Man to actually shut off the machine after they travel back to their worlds. Another little layer they added in, they're going to die if they don't travel back. So a basic setup for this little plot. And it all centers around this little USB MacGuffin device, which Spider-Man humorously calls a goober. And so the way that they solve that is that Miles just magically becomes better. So it's like you have to take a leap of faith. That's not how you get better at things. And so he jumps out a window and is suddenly able to do all the Spider-Man stuff. And then we're finally able to go into the final part of the movie, the final battle, in which all the Spider-Man are able to go back to their respective universes. And we're not sure if the pathetic Spider-Man's going to go back or not, but then he finally does. And then that's the end of the movie. We defeat Kingpin and we save the planet, and now Miles is the new Spider-Man, the new hip, cool Spider-Man. I thought that plot took so long to execute, and there was so little happening throughout that. It felt so much longer than I realized it was. I realized it's a little bit longer than a standard animation movie. Most animation movies are about 82 to 85 to 90 minutes on the long side. This one was really close to 2 hours. It was like an hour 52, I think. Which felt longer than an hour 52, and that's because there wasn't like a clear A, B, C story. Usually you'd have an A story, which is, we have to shut down this collider machine, which we don't even establish that until 30 minutes into it. That's why it feels long. You'd have a B story, does Gwen like me? Well, we just barely skitter on that B story where they don't even like each other because I don't know why. But you don't have enough time for that because you're too busy doing nothing. I don't know. And really no C story. So the C story should have been, and I think they tried to make it, pathetic Spider-Man wants to be good Spider-Man again. And he's distracted. He tries to talk to his wife who doesn't know him in this other universe. It's all a very pathetic and cringeworthy story. So the B and the C stories are so light, and the A story takes so long to get going, and they spend so much time on it. Everything feels out of balance throughout the plot. So the plot, the plot's not good. I'd probably give it like a 5 out of 10, maybe 5.5. It's not the worst plot ever, but it's just not that good. So maybe a 6 if you want to be generous. Now the characters, I think, were where this movie really didn't do it for me. Although the plot was not that good, the characters I thought were quite bad. So the Spider-Man that everyone loves, they kill, and they replace him with a pathetic Spider-Man. Now, if you're going to have a character take on the role of a teacher, which is what they set up, is that this Spider-Man is going to teach Miles how to be Spider-Man, then that character needs to be like Obi-Wan Kenobi, or needs to be like Morpheus in the Matrix. He needs to exude a confidence and exude a wisdom, and you get the opposite effect because they wanted the C story where he gets his mojo back. That doesn't really work. You can't really be the wise elder and also be working on getting your mojo back. That seems to me to be like a little bit of a projection of whatever the writers were feeling about themselves or something. Like they don't feel confident about themselves, or I don't know what it was. I don't know why that is, but those two things don't work. They really don't work well together. So the pathetic Spider-Man doesn't work as a teacher. Miles flailing about and doing ridiculous things, while the pathetic Spider-Man's doing things that are almost as ridiculous. He's not really showing him the ropes at all. So that relationship doesn't work at all. We don't like this newer Spider-Man. Now, Miles as a character is almost likable. He just keeps doing things that are cringy and not that likable. And I didn't really like the the acting for Miles. The exposition, which focuses on Miles's family dynamics and family life. You meet his dad, who's a cop. He goes to basically a boarding school in Brooklyn, which is a thing. For him to be able to get a good education, get out of the ghetto. But at the same time, his father being a cop seems to go against that a little bit. And then, of course, you have a little bit of exposition with his uncle, who turns out to be a supervillain that is then killed by the Kingpin. It's all there to make Miles likable, but it just doesn't succeed because he's so awkward all the time. Everything he does feels like an awkward middle schooler, and he is a middle schooler. So maybe it should be awkward, but it doesn't make you like him or respect him or really even want him to succeed. You kind of want some kind of growth out of that. Like for him, he just magically becomes cool at the end, but we didn't see any growth along the way. Likewise, with Peter Parker, there's this turning point in Peter Parker's character where, because of his inaction or his unwillingness to be a hero, his Uncle Owen dies. Well, in this case, his Miles's uncle dies, but he's killed by a supervillain. And it's not anything Miles did wrong. There's no guilt there. There's no feeling like, oh, I should have used my power for good. So the heroic motivation is completely eliminated. There's no reason for him to feel anything except revenge towards Kingpin, which isn't even explored remotely. So that's kind of a wasted opportunity for the Miles character. But even then, it's still just a repetition of Peter Parker, and that's my big complaint, is that Miles is not his own character. He really is an attempt to make a Peter Parker, but like diversity version. Black, half Puerto Rican, child, goes to a boarding school, like representing all these diversity tick boxes, inner city, stuff like that. And they didn't bother to really give him an original origin that would be different from Peter Parker. Like he could have been drastically different. And I'm not sure what they did with him in the comics, because it wasn't a comic that interested me remotely, was them making a Black Spider-Man. And when I said like I would be okay with a Black Spider-Man. I mean, if Peter Parker were played by a black actor in a movie, that wouldn't bother me, because Peter Parker is an American and there are Black Americans. In this case, rather than Miles being just a Black American, he's also all of these other check boxes. He has a story that's, to me, feels like a diversity story, but at the same time, he becomes Spider-Man in the same way, of a lower effect, though, than Peter Parker. And so his heroism is always going to feel of a lower value, and he's a lower value creative character than Peter Parker. He's just not he's not an example of creativity, really, at all. So I didn't like him. The extra Spider-Man, the comic relief Spider-Man, you have Noir Spider-Man and Piggy Spider-Man, and then Gwen Spider-Woman. They're all fine. They actually do a pretty good job, and I laughed a couple times at them. So they did an okay job, but the main characters I didn't really like, so that's going to be lower too. So I'd probably give those characters like a 5. I didn't feel completely hateful of them, but I didn't like them really either. Now let's move on to the general effect, where I kind of want to talk about the meta stuff. What surprised me about this movie, and the people recommending this movie to me, and the people talking about this movie on Twitter, is that there's people who are very sensitive to culture war issues. They're very sensitive to the fact that Marvel replaces their characters with diversity versions of pre-existing characters. Female Thor. Girl picks up the hammer, becomes female Thor. In this case, this is what you see, is they take the Spider-Man everybody loves, the heroic, young, romantic, funny, go-getter Spider-Man, and they literally kill him. Well, not literally, because he doesn't exist, but they kill him and they replace him with a caricature. They replace him with the Marvel Spider-Man that no one really likes, the more modern one. He's overweight, he's out of shape, he's pathetic, he's divorced. I think there was a storyline where like he makes a deal with the devil or something to break up his marriage and save his aunt, who's already like 90 years old, Aunt May. So he's a character of moral. Now that's not in this movie, but I just kind of it's on the side there, because that's the character Marvel's written over the last few years. it's all there to destroy the quality of Spider-Man. It's a deconstruction of the character of Spider-Man, rather than Spider-Man being a plucky, heroic, and virtuous character who has learned from his mistakes in the form of Peter Parker. What we instead get is a reflection of the society and a reflection of the authors, and that he's a broken, middle-aged, overweight loner who is unable to maintain basic life or social skills, unable to maintain a marriage, unable to be heroic. It's just a sad case, man. It's kind of like Luke Skywalker in The Last Jedi. I really didn't like seeing that character. There was a reason I avoided those comics, I guess, because I didn't like it. I grew up reading Spider-Man comics, and there used to be like 3 different Spider-Man comics you'd get. There's Amazing Spider-Man, Web of Spider-Man, and Spectacular Spider-Man. And so when I see that, I don't see a character who's amazing. Well, there's a web, but I don't see a spectacular character. I see a character that's intended to invoke pathos. And I don't like heroes being a reflection of some fallen and unworthy world. Heroes are supposed to be heroic. That's why we're attracted to them. That's why we like them. It doesn't mean they don't have moral struggles, but we expect them to somehow learn from those struggles and overcome them, not go the opposite way and succumb to moral weakness, succumb to the ravages of basic modern life. I know that that's maybe what the writers wanted to do at some point, is have this character has to deal with real world problems. Like, that's not why we read escapist literature, to read characters about who've had a divorce, just like our dads got divorced, or our dads divorced our mom. You might have had 2 dads that got divorced. I don't know. I don't want to tell your story. But anyway, I didn't like that. And I didn't like that it was such an obvious replacement of him with a diversity character that they didn't even really think very original about. So they bring him in only to show how pathetic Spider-Man is before they send him off and replace him with a newer, younger, hipper, blacker character. I'm surprised that nobody was throwing a fit over this. It was just so obvious to me, and I'm not usually sensitive to this kind of stuff, but I don't know how it could get more obvious. The kind of contempt that was on display for the Spider-Man character seemed, I don't know, man, it seemed very, very upfront to me. So I didn't like that part of the movie as well. So the bad animation combined with, in general, treatment of characters that wasn't to my tastes, music that wasn't to my tastes, and a plot that I felt like was far too long and not executed well, with the B and C stories just barely grazed by in favor of an A story that really takes far too long to execute. In general, I think the movie was bad. I'm going to give it like a general effect 3 out of 5. Or 3 out of 10. That's an F. So to me, it was pretty bad. You, of course, can have a different take. Now, I'm going to end this with a bunch of compliments for this movie. This is a movie that took a lot of risks, and I really appreciate that they did something very, very different. I really do appreciate that this movie was different from the normal schlock. Even though it wasn't good, and it wasn't well executed, and it was in some ways deconstructive, it took risks. It did a visual style that was very profoundly different from what we normally see. And I think for those of you who like it, obviously that was a good risk for them to take. It at least made me pay attention to it. Even though I didn't like it, I paid attention to what they were doing because it was so different. So that was probably a good choice, even if I didn't like it. And I do appreciate the risk. I appreciate that they actually didn't make an ABC story that was like Save the Cat, that they chose to do something different. Even though there's still that element there that they were trying to do those stories, I appreciate that they didn't stick to a pre-formatted way of exposing conflict and all that kind of stuff. They really did it their own way, and I think that's good. I think it was good that they took those risks. I don't think they were the risks I would have taken, and I don't think it worked out perfectly. Even though the exposition was long, I did like the fact that they showed Miles as part of an intact, caring family. I really actually appreciate that they did that, rather than having him be from a broken or abusive family. It's an intact family, but it's not a perfect family, because we do have an uncle who's a convict, and so we have an imperfect relationship with him, but never did I feel like his family was at risk or his family didn't love him. And so that's something I actually would compliment the movie on. Is even though I don't love the Miles character or the way he was executed, I think he's a character that represents good family values, and so thumbs up for that. Thumbs up for that element of the movie for sure. And so if they were to make a different kind of movie that didn't offend my eyes quite as much, I probably would have given this movie a much bigger pass, and I probably would have enjoyed a lot more elements to it as far as what's there with the family and with the character than what I actually end up seeing. I think again with most things it tends to be flaws in execution, not so much big ideas being bad, but just that they're not quite executed correctly. So anyway, let me know what you think down below. The deconstructive elements are really, I think, born of the comics, so I don't want to put it too much on the filmmakers, but it's their film, so they're ultimately responsible for some of those choices. So leave me your thoughts down below. What you think about Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse? Tell me how you disagree, if you disagreed, or tell me what I missed or what you agreed with about my little analysis here. And I'll see you guys next time. Oh yeah, you can buy my books. So they're on Amazon. Newest one's Voices of the Void. This is a sci-fi horror 2-hour read, designed to be 2 hours. Other 2-hour read, Chronocyte. This is a good one. Here's a family-friendly book, Garmish and the Farmer. This is a fairy tale designed for children, which I'm very proud of some of the moral lessons in that. So if you want something wholesome for children, this is my take on classic fairy tales. So thanks so much, guys, and I'll see you guys next time.